Coming up on this week's RegCast.
There is no more room for manual interference. We have to be fully automated, and that's only possible with standards, and that's across the value chain, whether it's transactions, whether it's clearing and settlement, whether it's asset servicing, or whether it's regulatory reporting.
But that there is a change in mindset for the regulators to say we're gonna go a step further, and we're gonna actually define all these regulations in using code. We are seeing a waves of regulations covering from trade reporting to transparency to market data. That's not going to stop. So the whole data quality standardization issue, but it needs to be part of your strategic vision of your firm, because it has huge implications in terms of your compliance, but also in terms of the resources that you need to put in place.
If the regulator's starting to move now and the industry isn't, we're going to have a big disconnect and a big bust up in 2026.
Welcome to RegCast.
RegCast. Tomorrow's RegTech Radar today.
Hello and welcome to episode 2, season 3 of RegCast. I'm PJ DiGiamarino, CEO and founder of JWG, and I am really pleased to be diving into the market data. RegRadars for TradFi and digital assets have really been heating up. We've got both of them on stage on the 22nd of March, and man, is there a lot to talk about. In a nutshell, regulators have shied away from getting their hands dirty in this space for years. The 2018 implementation left a lot to be desired in terms of how all the pre- and post-trade transparency was supposed to work. And now we have a real mess on our hands because the Europeans' dream of transparency has turned into a market data nightmare. It's plagued by extortionate costs and very dubious quality. Finborn Research, which is one of the players for consolidated tape provision, looked at 42 million transactions and identified 3 huge barriers last year. The first one was consolidation and aggregation, which is all about this myriad of codes and formats that don't make the consolidation of data in the market very easy. The second big thing they found was the consistency and completeness really varied in terms of how all the data is being populated and then sent out from the venues. And then coherence in terms of just the incorrect data that's currently out there. And this would be bad, but then follow that up with the FCA's wholesale trade data study, which came out yesterday. And we find that users are actually paying an awful lot for this data that's not particularly high value. And they're locked into lots of contracts to try to figure out generally how to think about getting a better view of the market. So the focus has really shifted from the bad old days of regulators stepping back and hoping these best execution reports would be useful for market clarity, to really stepping forward now and thinking about, well, what does it take to get these truly transparent feedback loops between the consumers and the market participants? And it's hard to believe it's only March because we already have a whole bunch of different consultations underway on the trading perimeter and the tendering process for the tapes, for the whole asset management sector. And even this week, the European Parliament has backed the whole concept of a consolidated tape, amongst other things. So who better to bring onto the show to warm up the stage for the 22nd of March than an industry data legal stalwart who's been representing the fund industry and has been at many a BaFin and EU expert group and even sits on the DTI committee. And a guru on financial data standards who's been up to his armpits in digital regulatory reporting. So, Rudy, thank you for joining us today. Can you just quickly introduce what you do?
Hey, PG, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here again and discussing with you, ultimately with the crowd, the upcoming events and standards for market data. I myself, in my day job, am managing director at BVI, which is the German asset management association representing regulated funds and portfolio managers. We have 140 members managing close to 4 trillion in assets, and all of these are digitalized in one form or the other, and therefore market data is a very important expense and a base for their existence.
Thank you. Mark.
Thank you, BJ. Great to be here today. My name is Mark Ratakos. I'm the managing partner of TradeHeather. TradeHeather is a consulting company focused on data, financial data standards. We work in several initiatives around the world in terms of data standardization. We're also developing the digital regulatory reporting project for the ISTA membership as well. So we're really keen to participate in this event to be able to expose some of our ideas in terms of transparency and market data.
Thank you, Mark. And it's so great to have you here at the party. I know you've been at this for decades. I guess let's start with the question about the challenges that are really in our face now. I mean, we're talking about by 2025, we're going to have to implement some of the big shifts that we're talking about. From your point of view, Rudy, what are some of those bigger shifts in the market that are going to hurt most?
Yeah, I mean, as briefly mentioned in the introduction, the buy side is following the sell side in terms of automation based on standards. Electronic trading is now the rule in definitely all of equity trading, but also non-equity trading is increasingly important on an electronic basis. Market Access, TradeWeb, and Bloomberg are the Borgs in that area and are increasingly market share. So everybody essentially needs to be able to digest data in electronic format from various sources. And the regulator is increasingly recognizing that. We have just had an agreement in the European Parliament on the MiFID II reform package, or MiFID III, going forward, which will include a consolidated tape for several asset classes, improvements in the market data cost space, but also new restrictions in terms of using non-exchange trading. Furthermore, we have MiCA coming on the purely digital or tokenized asset size, where also the benefits of standardizations are largely still lacking, for example, in the area of how to identify a token. That all makes it important that the regulators have recognized that there is a digital challenge to implement electronic trading, and that is increasingly reflected in the regulation. We would hope that the Parliament, the Council, and the Commission reaches agreement on MiFID III until mid of this year, which would allow implementation indeed by around 2025. Some parts may be quicker. We just heard that the bond CT consolidated tape may already come well before that, because apparently ESMA is already considering accepting applications of potential providers after the middle of this year.
And could you spell out just a bit what role will the regulator play in
I mean, if we come to data, especially trading data, I mean, the law of the land is RTS1 for equity data and RTS2 for non-equity data. RTS2 probably should be specified more into several parts, one for bonds, or one for derivatives, one maybe for other non-equity instruments. The regulators have already started to do reforms on that, which means addressing those points you mentioned before: consistency, aggregation, completeness, and coherence, by providing for more detailed definitions and also in part adding new fields, especially on bond data. Furthermore, then the NCAs, the national competent authorities, the FCAs, the BaFins, the CONSOBs in Italy, the AMF in France need to work that actually these standards are also then applied, especially by the banks, who are the main market makers and traders in the bond area. Obviously, the other part of the coin is the cost and license matter. That is more an equity today than a bond issuer. But on the equity side, obviously, the existing regulated markets or exchanges have a monopoly position in the sense that they are able, as listing venues, to control largely the trading of their listed instruments and thereby providing the reference price, which in turn is then the main supporter of OTC trading through the reference price waiver. But on the other hand, gives the exchanges the opportunity to charge for their market data, recognizing that their data is used in external venues, for example, by charging MTFs working on the basis of the reference price waiver, or SIs, i.e. banks with a considerable trading business dealing OTC, also on these data. And therefore, strengthening Article 13 of MiFIR is important. Article 13 will be strengthened more in the direction that the so-called reasonable commercial basis, which is a soft wording, as we all know, will be more clarified, that that should be based on the cost of production of market data, and recognizing that market data is a byproduct of the trading nature, thereby limiting the scope of the exchanges, for example, and other trading venues to charge overhead and overall costs into the cost of market data production.
Yeah.
What still will be missing is that the law unfortunately still allows so-called value-based pricing, i.e. although the venue only has once the cost of production, they still charge you differently whether you are using the same data, the same feed for trading internally against own account, for trading for clients, or if you are a large trading, i.e. an SI, systematic internalizer firm, you charge more. If you are an MTF, you are also charged more. And if you are an index producer with some exchanges like Deutsche Börse, you have even to pay the highest license fees, which is the so-called value pricing. That should be abolished, because again, if RCB is based on the cost of production, the exchange only has once to produce the feed, then can send it out to multiple users. Yeah. And it does not make a difference whether the user, for what purpose the user is using the data.
Yeah, and so those issues are all tightly connected in terms of the RTS 1 and 2 defining the technical standards for what data is required, but then this new creation of a consolidated tape provider, which is the WHO, needs to think about pulling that all together for the market. But then obviously how much you can charge is a key point of that. Mark, from your point of view, I mean, you've seen these data standard issues up close and personally for decades. How do you look at the big challenges here?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I think we are in a period of change, which is driven by some of the aspects and issues that Rudy just explained. But just we step back a bit. Like, there are a couple of things that are interesting, especially if we have some discussions like that happened like maybe a few years ago. Some of the big statements that some of the people in the industry were making was like regulators are not gonna define a specific data format to actually like report some of these data, right? And we are seeing completely the opposite in the recent years. We are seeing regulators stepping in and defining a particular format for things like trade reporting. So we are moving into a scenario where regulators are being much more prescriptive and specific in not also the data elements they want you to provide in trade, but also in data, market data, but also the formats in which need to provide that information. And that's really interesting because it's a complete change from what the industry was seeing a few years ago, in which the regulator was just leaving that to intermediaries to provide that format. And that's really interesting because if you look at market data, right, that's completely opposite to what we have seen in the past in market data. We have seen providers, some of them using standards like FIX, but most of them creating like proprietary data formats because of this idea of locking effect or whatever, in a sense that each one of them was creating the particular format for their clients. And that's super expensive, as we know, right? Because each integration requires to define a particular format in the API, and you need like to spend a lot of money and a lot of time to be able to comply with that particular format that the provider is providing that information with. So that's interesting because in one hand we have a force of standardization from regulatory reporting. In the other, we have seen a market in which, to be honest, data standards were lacking in terms of usage, and that's for me that's really exciting because it seems that we will need to change in the industry.
What's the big impact there? I mean, I hear a lot of people scratching their head and saying, "So what?" Sounds like a bunch of technical stuff, but what does it actually mean out in the marketplace?
I think sometimes we underestimate the effort to change some of the processes and systems that people use to connect to some of the venues and get all of the information. Just keep in mind like some of the complexity in the processes around that, and the fact that this data it's real time, all the technical aspects of that. So switching from one format to another is not trivial and requires investment. And we are in a situation where, I mean, like we know, like resources are limited, especially nowadays with all the regulations coming up. So I think it's a challenge. I don't think it's something that is just like trivial and change one day to another. I think it will require investment and it will require change, like in the systems for all the firms. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess Rudy, you highlighted some of the impact of the commercial side of that change. But what's the regulator's role there beyond commercial in terms of quality and the arbiter of what good looks like?
Yeah, I mean, what we have seen in the debate leading to the potential advantages of a consolidated tape is indeed that regulators have admitted that usually, similar to what Mark was saying, they are not paying too much attention to the technical nitty-gritty implementation of these data standards today. That certainly has changed, or the capacity at some regulators is still lacking to follow up on a day-to-day basis. But even if the regulators put more emphasis on actually making sure that especially banks in the bond area where the data quality is lacking most, corporate bonds, that they really follow up, I would say, ideally on a daily basis, but definitely perhaps on a weekly basis, so that overall data quality improves. They will always only do that for the subjects under their control, i.e. the Dutch AFM will only police Dutch banks, the German BaFin only German banks. So still, even if they would all do it to the same effect and the same direction, you will have difference between the Dutch interpretation and the German interpretation. So coherence will still be lacking. Therefore, we advocated, and many other on the sell side, that the consolidated tape would be indeed, because it's driven by real-time data, has to monitor data quality personally, would give the regulators, or better, the supervisory agencies, a joint view where the problems arise, and then enable them to go back to their own subjects and may have to change a certain practice in order to achieve a common European coherent data reporting. That could be one advantage of the consolidated tape, because there you would have the commercial provider constantly feeding this information on lack of data quality into the supervisory space, either directly to the national supervisory agency concerned or through ESMA, and thereby improve data quality on a daily basis, because that's what's really lacking.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess that you never have just one problem, right? So it's a quality, cost, or time. We haven't dug much into time, but Mark, I think that's a key issue here, right? So if you're trying to solve this problem, one of the things you have to do is do it quickly, and that requires much better tooling than what we got today. Why don't you tell people how the DRR work would approach helping that?
Yeah, that's what we're hoping as well, BJ, is that the consolidated tape in Europe and all these initiatives like spur the use of not using regulations just like as a PDF with a bunch of text and fields that need to be reported, but that there is a change in mindset for the regulators to say we're gonna go a step further. And we're gonna actually like define all these regulations in using code, right? And this is the whole idea about digital regulatory reporting. It's this idea of generating the regulations as code so that firms can implement in an open way. So we don't have to do the same regulatory project in each one of the firms, right? So if like the asset managers need to implement a regulation in, let's say, market data, each one will have the same questions and the same issues facing that project. So instead of doing that by themselves, they create some sort of mutualized effort in which they can share the issues, they can share the experiences they have, and generate an actual implementation of the regulation that is implementable, can be kind of implemented in as a code. And that will be ideal that it's not only an effort that it's being done by the banks and the asset managers and the vendors, but also regulators actually take that as part of their solution that they provide, instead of sending a PDF with 1,000 pages, that they actually define the regulation as code. And I think that's the ultimate goal of the whole digital regulatory reporting. We are doing that in the context of trade reporting right now. We did that for CFTC, we are doing that for EMIR, and we'll do that for the Asia Pacific jurisdictions that are coming up, because there is a lot of reusability. So what we're seeing is that by implementing CFTC trade reporting, we are also implementing around 50% of the rules in EMIR already. We have that implemented just by reusing what we have for CFTC. And we anticipate much more reusability across all the other jurisdictions. And we think this idea is not only applicable for trade reporting, but also can be applied to other reports like market data or any sort of transparency information that needs to be provided. So I think it's scalable to other areas of financial reporting, not only trade reporting. And we see huge advantages in terms of cost savings for the firms because they can mutualize the effort and not do the projects by themselves, which are very expensive, to be honest.
Yeah, and the collaboration that's been going on is fantastic. We're pleased to have been playing a role in getting this moving over the past 5 years. But what strikes me is that in order to get the benefit, the code isn't going to maintain itself, and it's not going to bless itself. It needs buy-in from the regulators. And with derivatives, they had this great advantage, right? All the regulators actually agreed a common definition of a bunch of their fields. And that gave people the business case to say, okay, big bank A and big bank B can sit down globally and sort this out. Rudy, from your conversations with within some of the committees you've been sitting on in Europe, do you see the same kind of appetite to engage in this kind of model and get to a place where the whole industry agrees around these new data standards?
I mean, certainly with DRR and so on, JWG and the sponsors are certainly ahead of the curve. At least from my buy-side experience, most people are still working on the basis, how can we improve the next Excel spreadsheet to have a workaround for our existing reporting to maybe cater for EMIR reporting, which Mark correctly mentioned. People are yelling, oh, now we have to implement ISO 20022 messages as if this would be something really new. So the lack of investment, the lack of attention by senior management, especially to data standards, data issues, is really evident. At least I would presume outside large banks, which I don't represent. So we have a long battle ahead of us. We at BVI are personally engaged in favor of ISO 20022 messaging because of the unstandardized situation back in fund processing since 2002, and still ISO 20022 is not the standard for securities trade messaging at SWIFT because of the resistance of a large part of the community. So that hopefully isn't bad news for DRR, but we certainly need to work more. And I'm always a little bit a believer in that if we get some regulatory nudging, which would help DR implementation, that obviously makes the industry move faster. Because based on more than 20 years of working in a trade association, my members usually do not react until it's 6 months before implementation date, and then they will do something. And unfortunately, the message since nearly 5 years now is, oh, we don't have any money for implementation, new kinds of reporting not required by the regulator. So there is some hope because DR essentially will first be used in the context of regulation and regulatory reporting, that we indeed can push forward automation based on standardization in this way.
And what's the one message you're looking to get across on the 22nd of March that people should tune into?
It's the end of workarounds. Digitalization must be based on standards supporting automation. That is true for the regulatory reporting space, but there we are not really dealing with timely issues. It's still correct if you do it in the day. But with T+1 coming on in the US and starting discussion of T+1 also in the EU and in the UK, there is no more room for manual interference. We have to be fully automated, and that's only possible with standards, and that's across the value chain, whether it's transactions, whether it's clearing and settlement, whether it's asset serving, or whether it's regulatory reporting. That would be my main message.
Fantastic. Mark?
I agree with Rudy. I will add to that that in general, I think firms will need to be much more proactive to this, related to the point we were discussing before. I think firms so far have been very reactive on all these issues. I think when they need to be much more proactive in a sense that this is not going to stop, right? So we are seeing a waves of regulations covering like from trade reporting to transparency to market data. That's not going to stop. So the whole data quality standardization issue, it's cannot be treated as just a reactive project that we do every once and then when we have a new regulation, but it needs to be part of your strategic vision of your firm, because it has huge implications in terms of your compliance, but also in terms of the resources that you need to put in place to be able to deliver that. And I think that's some of the major, I think, messages I would like to bring to the table for the upcoming event.
Well, thank you both. Those are excellent messages. I would only echo that, you need to get ahead of this. It may seem like 2025 is a long way away, but these projects take time. And ultimately, if the regulator's starting to move now and the industry isn't, we're going to have a big disconnect and a big bust up in 2026. So without further ado, I thank you very much for your participation here today. And thank you for helping us on the 22nd of March, where everyone can dial in. We will, of course, send around details and put links in, but it's, as ever, jwg-it.eu, and I'll take you to the event website. Thank you for liking this podcast, whatever channel you pick it up on. It helps other people find it. And we look forward to putting out a few more before the 22nd of March. Thanks very much.
You can download the podcast via Spotify, Apple, and Google. But also, I'd encourage people to come to the JWG website, which, as hopefully you will know, is jwg-it.eu. Go to the Intelligence Hub and create your bespoke library.
This is RegCast.
Tomorrow's RegTech Radar today.